Welcome to Working with Video Files. Let's take a look at how we can use the movie file in top when working with video. I'm going to double click on my network here, add a movie file in top. Let's change this file parameter to be the count movie. Our first parameter we want to look at here is our reload pulse parameter. This parameter completely reloads a file, and you might use it if you've changed your movie file externally and then want to reload it inside of TouchDesigner. Just note that when you're using Reload Pulse, you may notice a flash when you reload your file. Let's skip play modes for now and look at the play parameter. The play parameter is toggled on by default and lets you play and also pause your movie. Next, we have our speed parameter, which lets you control the speed of your video playback. A value of 1 is the default playback speed, while a value of 2 will double your speed. A value of 0.5 will half your speed, and so on. Note that the speed parameter only works when the play mode is set to sequential. Let's set the speed to 0.1 so that we can look at our next parameters more closely. We have our Q pulse parameter. When we click on Q pulse, we'll notice that we jump to the beginning of our movie file. This pulse can also allow you to jump to a specific point in your movie file. So if we change our Q point to 0.5 and then hit the pulse, we can jump to the halfway point of our video or any specified point. By default, Q point is set to percentage or fraction. Now let's toggle on our Q parameter. What happens here is it pauses our video playback and then allows us to actually scrub using the Q point slider and scrub through our video file. When our Q point is set to 0, we can see the first image of our video file, which in this case shows a 1. Once we toggle off our Q parameter, we'll start playing our video file from that specified Q point. Before we look at our play modes, it's important to note that there are lots of ways to control video files inside of TouchDesigner. And that's partially because there are lots of different ways that we can think about and use time inside of our networks. Every video file is made with a certain frames per second, like 30 FPS. But to avoid confusion in TouchDesigner, we call it images per second or sample rate. We can middle mouse on a movie file, so middle mouse on our movie file here to find the sample rate of our video. Here it's set to 60. In TouchDesigner, files have sample rates, while your project has a frame rate. We can see that our timeline at the bottom left has a frame rate or FPS. This is typically set to 60, which often matches the refresh rate of most monitors. Whenever we think about or talk about frame inside of TouchDesigner, we're talking about our timeline. Looking closer at the play mode parameter on our movie file in top, we have a few options for our play modes. Sequential is the default play mode and plays continuously regardless of the timeline's position. For beginners, this is probably the way you'll want to play back your video files. When your movie file in top is set to sequential, you don't have to worry if the file's sample rate is 29 drop, 30, or 15, as TouchDesigner will do all the work to make sure your video plays back smoothly. Let's go ahead and copy and paste our movie file in. And let's look at the next play mode. Let's change our second movie file in to locked timeline. Like the name implies, this mode will keep your video file linked to your project's timeline. Here, if I scrub on my timeline, we can actually see that we're controlling our movie file. If you're trying to synchronize a single video to other elements in your timeline, this might be a useful mode to use. Just note that when locked to timeline is on, the play, speed, cue, and index parameters are all disabled, as in this mode, the timeline is directly controlling the movie's position. Let's copy and paste our movie file in again, and let's look at our final play mode, specify index. So let's change this to specify index. This mode allows us to specify a particular position in the video that we're using, and we can change it using the index parameter. Once we start to control our video playback of the file directly, it's even more important to understand the distinction between a file's sample rate and a project's FPS, since the way that you choose to drive your movie files may impact the playback behavior that you see in your project. Specify index has 4 unit options: index, frames, seconds, and fractions. Let's look at the index unit. When you set the index unit here to index, you can specify the exact index of the video file you would like to display. So I'm going to set it to 10. Awesome. This will stay the same regardless of our project's FPS, so we can specify exactly where we want to be. Let's switch our unit now to fraction. This specifies what fraction or percentage of the video you want to go to. So if we wanted to go to the first quarter of our video, we could type in 0.25. For more advanced users, or when you need a lot of control over the way your video plays, you might use specify index. Lastly, let's look at the common page. Here we have our output resolution. This parameter changes our top's resolution, and it allows us to half, quarter, double, or even have a custom resolution. Let's go ahead and set this to half. If we look at our info, we can see that this is now set to 320 by 180 versus the use input, which is the default, that was 640 by 360. Sometimes it's a good trick to set your top's resolution to half so that your operators downstream will composite at a lower resolution than the file. One important thing to note about output resolution is that this only changes the resolution within TouchDesigner and does not change the resolution of your file on disk. Alrighty, that is a quick run through of working with video files inside of TouchDesigner.